So the topic I'm going to refute today is drug policies and mass incarceration. The claim that is being responded to is drug policy making leads to mass incarceration rather than reducing crime. I have a few terms to explain to you guys before I talk about it in the speech. First is mass incarceration. For any of you that don't know what that is the high rates of imprisonment. And then the second one is private prisons. They are owned by for-profit companies that have contracts with the federal or state governments to either take care of management over state-run facilities or house people in a privately constructed prison. And also, private prisons generally charge a daily rate per person that is in prison under the care to cover investments, to operating costs, and to turn in a profit. So my opponents supporting secondary claims are, number one, policies are made based on the benefits of those who support the policies. And number two, policies focus on punishing those who commit a crime rather in prevention of the use of drugs. So my response to the first claim, policies made based on the benefits of those who create them, my opponent was very vague on that, and she did not use any data to support her claim. Also, she merely stated that policymakers are bribed to some extent, and they are using incarceration as a political strategy. I have a data report from June 2011 by the Justice Policy Institute, reveals that for-profit prison companies use political campaign donations, lobbyists, and relationships with the government to increase their profits by promoting policies that result in more people in prison, so they gain more money. Just an idea of how much revenue they make. Just two private companies, a yearly revenue they make $2.9 billion in just a year. And the purpose of such contributions is to gain access to lawmakers who are agreeable to passing legislative favorable to the private industry, and also to buy political influence, so they have more say and to control people in the system. And her secondary claim number two is policies focus on punishing those who commit a crime rather in the prevention of use of drugs. She uses a quote from Stevenson: "Drug policy and incarceration of low-level drug offenders is the primary cause of mass incarceration in the United States." She also states that 40% of the drug arrests are simple possessions of marijuana. And now, even though she does talk about the controversy of drug possession, this piece of evidence is not important to her claim because it just states that people got arrested but not placed in jail. So I have a piece of evidence on September 30th from 2013 that 98,000 inmates, that's around 50% of the federal prison population, were imprisoned for possession, trafficking, or other drug crimes, according to Drug War Facts Organization. And the second piece of evidence she used to support her claim is that she just talks about how there's like 1.6 million people arrested because of drug possession alone, and the age and amount of users of drug users. The age and amount of people using drugs is irrelevant to her claim, but my opponent does draw awareness to the fact that the U.S. is the world leader for incarceration, with over 2 million people in prison. According to prisonpolicy.org, in March 12, 2014, the amount of people that are locked up in any kind of facility for a drug offense is roughly around 337,000 out of the 2 million that are in the U.S. prison. The advocate also talks about a call for action that the money used to support these policies should be used to help programs for drug abusers. And I want to end with a quote from the White House. "Enforcement critic war on drugs approach to drug policy is counterproductive, inefficient, and costly." At the other extreme, drug legalization also runs counter to a public health and safety approach to drug policy. The more American uses drugs, the higher the health, safety, productivity, and criminal justice costs we all have to bear.
All right, and it starts off pretty well with your identification of the topic and your definition of for-profit. I didn't think you really needed to define mass incarceration, but what a for-profit prison is, that's okay, because that's part of ultimately the claim that's being presented. And then you start getting into the advocate's secondary points. The question, though, is that it really sounds like you are making a better argument for the advocate's claims than the advocate made for themselves. In other words, this is not a refutation. This is almost a critique, and let me show you how it's done. Shove you out of the way, and that's not really the way you want to go with this. On the first point, for instance, you had a piece of information that talked about how these for-profit prisons are donating to the political process, and they're doing it for the exact purpose of building a profit and trying to put in policies that I guess are going to increase their prisons or people in their prisons. So it's like the people who run the prisons are donating to representatives to make laws that lock people up so that they continue to have a profit. That seems to be the inference that's being made here, and you present a pretty straightforward piece of evidence that suggests that's the cycle that's going on there. So the advocate didn't present a good piece of evidence, but here's a good piece of evidence that proves that point. That doesn't really refute the argument at all. On the second point, when you talk about the crime rate, they're focusing on crime as a way of addressing this as opposed to drug treatment. You then kind of repeat the advocate's general evidence, that's okay. But you then present a couple of statistics, and I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to do with those statistics. You've got this one statistic that says 98,000 of the inmates were arrested for trafficking, and that's out of 1.6 million. And then later on, you've got another statistic that says 337,000 out of 2 million are in there for that particular person or purpose. And I'm going, okay, so does that mean that it's less than the advocate said or more than the advocate said? Does that mean that the advocate's conclusion is inaccurate? How am I supposed to use that information? You've given me data without telling me what claim you want to support with that data. And that's, it's just information by itself. And that's, I think, the biggest problem with the argument is that you're kind of giving us a context for the advocate's argument instead of a refutation for the argument. It was easy to follow the structure, and I could understand the evidence that you're presenting. What I didn't understand is why you were presenting it, because there's not really a conclusion that's being presented here. All right, thank you.